Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Aether Hub and more Magic the Gathering lore. So I've been thinking a lot about Zendikar Rising lately and what the story could possibly be there. And while I certainly have my theories, which I can share in another video if you guys are interested, there's one subject we don't have to speculate on: the Planeswalkers who will be featured in our return to the Eldrazi Ravaged Plane. The three main characters in Zendikar Rising seem to be all returning Planeswalkers, so no new ones this time around, but we still don't know their purpose or motives that would bring them back to Zendikar. So what I decided to do in this video is cover what we know about these Planeswalkers and their connection to Zendikar, learning their history with the plane so we can better understand their possible role in Zendikar Rising. And get ready guys, because we aren't just covering the three Planeswalkers featured in this set. No, there's a special fourth character, probably the biggest and most influential of them all, that I'll explain at the end. So make sure you watch all the way through so you don't miss that. And with that, let's explore the history of Jace, Nissa, and Nahiri on Zendikar. But first, a quick side note and a self-plug, just reminding you guys in the Vorthos army about my second channel focused on World of Warcraft. This week I'm actually starting some lore videos on the game, so if you like my content here and want to support a new channel of mine, please go ahead and give it a sub. It does a lot for helping it grow. You can find a link to my WoW channel on your screen now or in the description below. And with that out of the way, let's get back to the lore. As mentioned at the start of this video, we learned from product packaging and an interview with Mark Rosewater that Zendikar Rising will see only 3 Planeswalkers, all of which are well-established characters in the lore. These Planeswalkers will be Nissa Revane, Jace Beleren, and Nahiri the Lithomancer. Let's go over each of these characters and learn how these Planeswalkers are tied to Zendikar and each other, and cap it with their most recent activities and what could possibly drive them back to Zendikar. Now, I covered a lot of the history of Zendikar across the various sets in which we visited this plane in my previous video, which you can find linked on your screen or in the description below, but I'll quickly go over how these 3 Planeswalkers specifically, those we'll see returning in Zendikar Rising, have impacted this world. Let's begin with the most common of these 3, Jace Beleren, the poster boy for Wizards of the Coast and the perfect, we'll just make him fit into any story kind of character. Jace has a long history in the game, meddling in seemingly countless worlds and taking part in almost every major event in modern Magic lore, and this influence extends significantly to the plane of Zendikar. Jace's first experience with Zendikar is in chasing the then rogue thief Chandra Nalaar after she stole the mysterious and ancient Dragon Scroll. Jace was working for Tezzeret and by extension Nicol Bolas at the Infinite Consortium, an interplanar artifacts trading and selling guild, to explain it simply. Well, Jace was tasked in tracking down Chandra, who had stolen an item known as the Dragon Scroll, and wipe her memory clean of the artifact. Jace was successful in this task, but his interest in the scroll and its importance only grew from there. Jace does love his puzzles, and in decoding the puzzle of the scroll, Jace found that it led to the plane of Zendikar, and to a specific location known as the Eye of Ugin. You guys know where the story goes from here. The Eye of Ugin is the ancient prison of the Eldrazi Titans, in which Ugin and his 2 companions worked together to trap the 3 Eldrazi Titans, Emrakul, Ulamog, and Kozilek, so that they could no longer threaten the entire multiverse with their endless hunger. Yes, Jace was messing around unknowingly with the locks sealing away the most dangerous forces known in the multiverse at the time, all of which were imprisoned on Zendikar. Within the walls of this prison, Jace found Chandra already there and already locked in combat with another Planeswalker, Sarkhan Vol, a dragon-worshipping Planeswalker and lackey of Nicol Bolas. Jace wanted to help the misunderstood Chandra, who he sort of pitied and felt sorry in wiping her mind, but neither of their magic worked within the Eye of Ugin. All Jace could think to do was use an ancient magic described in the Dragon Scroll itself, a colorless, non-physical fire, a unique type of magic he's never seen before. Describing in layman's terms to Chandra this ghost fire, Chandra cast an invisible blaze that would change the history of Zendikar forever. And guys, come on, we know the story from here. The 3 Planeswalkers being there and the use of the Ghost Fire was no accident. Nicol Bolas orchestrated these events and these pawns being in place because these were the requirements set by Ugin to weaken the seal on the Eldrazi's prison. 3 Planeswalker sparks and the use of Ugin's breath, Ghostfire, which Jace foolishly provided. With these requirements met, the Eldrazi were freed, at least to an extent, and Jace escaped without fully understanding what he had just done. He spent a little bit more time after this on Zendikar, asking about the Eldrazi and trying to find out as much as he could about these creatures locked within Zendikar, but little was known at the time. However, they were a threat, and Jace left seeking answers. Nissa and Nahiri, by contrast, are natives of Zendikar, so they've spent a majority of their lives on this turbulent world, and they know it well. Nahiri is by far the oldest character we know coming out of Zendikar, having predated even Ugin's arrival to the plane. Now that's not saying Nahiri is older than Ugin, but she's spent more time on Zendikar than Ugin has. Nahiri is the self-proclaimed guardian of Zendikar, a core whose pride and fierce protective nature of her home has come to be something of legend. This is first seen in her confrontation with Ob-Nixilis, the would-be world-conquering planeswalker turned demon who sought to use Zendikar's mana to cure himself of a curse. Nahiri confronted the powerful demon and jammed a Hedron, devices she crafted herself using lithomancy magic, right into Abi's forehead. This further weakened the demon. Not only is he unable to planeswalk, but he also can't fly, as his wings shriveled and fell off thanks to the Hedron's magic. Since then, Nahiri has done everything and anything to ensure the survival of Zendikar, including helping Ugin build the very prison that Jace would later tamper with. Yes, all the magic flowing through the Hedrons and into the Eye of Ugin were all crafted by Nahiri out of worry for her home. After Ugin had described the threat of the Eldrazi, how could she possibly ignore them and hope they'd never see Zendikar as their next meal? She, Ugin, and Soren Markov worked together to trap the three multiversal monsters deep within Zendikar, imposing herself as their warden for the rest of time, willing and ready to fight back should anything disturb their eternal punishment. Nissa actually has a slightly different history with Zendikar than the others do. Rather than being protective or even just curious, this elf native was much more fearful and doubtful that anyone could fight off such an overpowering force that were the Eldrazi. Her history and origin has gone through a few retcons for sure. Once she was a pretty racist elf supremacist, to now just being an awkward druid shaman anima trainee. It's safe to say Nissa has an awkward past in Magic's lore. However, one thing that hasn't really changed is that Nissa is actually the one responsible for the ultimate devastation of Zendikar. She went with Soren Markov after the seal at the Eye of Ugin was cracked under the pretense of helping restore that lock. However, out of fear and doubt, Nissa actually channeled her energy into destroying the one thing that was keeping the Eldrazi Titans chained down, the central Hedron. Now, she did this not because she wanted the Eldrazi freed, but she thought it was Zendikar's best chance of survival. She thought that in freeing the Titans, they would simply just float off into the blind eternity, leaving Zendikar alone. That way, her world would be free of the threat of another break. Of course, she was very, very wrong, and at least Ulamog just chilled out and started eating Zendikar anyway. Probably one of the biggest blunders in MTG history. Thanks, Nissa. Jace then returned to Zendikar on a completely non-Eldrazi related mission to save Garruk Wildspeaker, as Garruk had been cursed by the Chain Veil in a fight against Liliana Vess, and that dark magic was turning the hunter ever more evil. He went on a mindless killing rampage and soon was targeting planeswalkers specifically. Hoping to stop this and save a friend, Jace took what he learned about the Hedrons on Zendikar, the devices used to control, store, and contain magic, to somehow fashion a means to contain the growing rage and corruption of Garruk. With that in mind, he stumbled upon a demon on Zendikar who shared with him the secrets of the Hedrons and how they could be used for this exact purpose. This demon was none other than Ob-Nixilis. Ob-Nixilis tricked Jace into removing the small Hedron that was embedded in his skin, the device locking his power. Ob-Nixilis used cunning to have Jace fight him, to quote-unquote beat the demon, and take the Hedron from his body. With that, Jace had what he needed to help Garruk, and Ob-Nixilis was in turn freed from his weakened state. Though he wouldn't become fully restored and a planeswalker again, the demon did manage to grow his wings back once Jace removed the Hedron. Jace then placed the Hedron within Garruk's body, which did little to cure the corruption. However, the curse didn't spread further. The Hedron managed to curb the hunter's rage, and no longer was he actively killing planeswalkers. He remained cursed, alone, and dark, but would only strike out at those who confronted him, like Jace, should he ever see him again. Of course, since then, Garruk has been ultimately cured of his madness thanks to the storyline of Throne of Eldraine, but Jace and Garruk haven't had that reunion yet. And of course, we can't forget about the Battle for Zendikar and Gatewatch sagas, the last stories we had on Zendikar. Now this is really beating a dead horse at this point, as I cover the lore in these sets already pretty extensively in my history video, which again you guys can catch in the description below. So I'm not going to go too deep into that here. Just know that while Nahiri was off settling grudges, Nissa and Jace both managed to right some wrongs and redeem themselves by actually destroying the Eldrazi Titans, Ulamog and Kozilek, forever. They worked together with a group now known as the Gatewatch to rid the multiverse of two massive threats, and doing what many believe to be completely impossible. And that's where we see Zendikar right now going into Zendikar Rising, a world finally free of the Eldrazi, with champions of both the past and present returning to a world they haven't known in years, a Zendikar free of the threat of Eldrazi. So that's the brief history of Nissa, Nahiri, and Jace in regards to Zendikar, but what have they done recently that would see them returning to this plane? Well, the last major event that involved all of them was the War of the Spark. Yes, the great climactic battle between the heroes of the multiverse and Nicol Bolas. His plan so many years ago to free the Eldrazi Titans, eventually leading to this, the Gatewatch who confronted him. Nissa, as her part in the war, used her powerful elemental magic to animate the entire guild hall of the Selesnyan conclave, known as Vitu-Ghazi, and used it to fight off the dread horde of Bolas and tear down one of his massive statues. This, of course, proved useful in raising morale, but not in raising allies, as the Selesnya didn't take too kindly of their ancient world tree being used as a tool of war, and ultimately being destroyed by the forces of Bolas. Another blunder, Nissa. Jace, for his part in the war, acted as he always had for the Gatewatch in being a coordinator and strategist rather than a frontline soldier. He was able to decipher the riddle left by the dragon Niv-Mizzet that ultimately led to his resurrection and the creation of a new living guild pact on Ravnica. This deed was instrumental in the downfall of Bolas, so Jace can say that he pulled his weight on this one. Nahiri, on the other hand, well, she was more carried through this conflict than anything else. Though a skilled and powerful planeswalker, Nahiri had no real stake in the War of the Spark with no real history with Nicol Bolas. Rather, she spent all her time trapped in this war fighting with her previous mentor, Sorin Markov, one of her former allies who originally sealed away the Eldrazi. They had a few tiffs over the centuries, over who didn't help who in whose time of need, and blah blah blah. Nahiri was still pissed that Sorin locked her away for years within the Hell Vaults, surrounded by demons, because she and him got into a little fight. And Sorin's mad at Nahiri for trapping him in stone and summoning the final Eldrazi Titan, Emrakul, to his home plane of Innistrad to have it destroyed. They have a lot of history together. So they spent the whole War of the Spark fighting each other, eventually calling a truce just to survive against Bolas and his dread horde, but none of that is really ever explored further in the cards or in the official novel. So yeah, it's weak. Regardless, all of these planeswalkers were present at the downfall of Bolas and the end of the War of the Spark, and they all walked away from it feeling slightly different. Jace was looking forward to returning to a time less marred by the memory of Bolas and his conflicts, back to the days of his pirateering on Ixalan. Yes, it looks like Jace is taking a much-deserved vacation to Zendikar, hood down, wind in his hair, just exploring the rich natural wonders this plane has to offer. He's likely traveling here because, well, it's the last plane he visited he's sure there's no real multiversal threat or conflict going on. Ravnica's still recovering, and there's just way too much history there. So it looks like he wants to take a carefree romp through Zendikar instead. He may also just be nostalgic for this plane, as it's the site of the Gatewatch's first real victory, the place that started so much good throughout the multiverse. This may be his new happy place, as it were. Why doesn't he just travel back to Ixalan and be a pirate there? Beats me, don't ask questions. As for Nahiri, well, with her sort of hashing things out with Sorin, kind of, she may have found out that Zendikar wasn't as destroyed as she first believed. Nahiri was so pissed with Sorin because she believed that his betrayal led to the Eldrazi break and the destruction of Zendikar. That's why she summoned the Titan Emrakul to Sorin's home of Innistrad, a sort of eye for an eye kind of punishment. But she didn't know that the Gatewatch were actually successful in destroying the Titans on Zendikar. During the War of the Spark, this revelation probably occurs, and that's why Nahiri ends her feud with Sorin, for the time being. And after the War of the Spark, she returns to Zendikar finding it, well, not destroyed. And she's probably exploring the lasting damage the Titans left in their wake. As for Nissa, now she's got some weird lore coming into Zendikar Rising. From pictures and some leaked info, it looks like the gentle elf is getting more of a darker side in this set. Mixing with black mana, Nissa may be dabbling in some Golgari vibes. And she's looking angry as hell. But why? With the defeat of Bolas, the Gatewatch lost a founding member in Gideon Jorah, who was a friend to all of them, so it comes as a huge loss. However, the real tipping point would be Nissa's relationship with Chandra Nalaar. They've always had an on-again, off-again sort of love interest floating around, with Nissa actually being the one to drive a divide between them, unable to process the emotions, and Chandra, let's be real, basically just throwing herself at the elf. Still at the funeral for Gideon Jorah, Nissa asks Chandra to follow her back to her home of Zendikar, but Chandra declines. In fact, their final goodbye is rather cold and emotionless, lacking the fire and indeed awkwardness of previous encounters. I know that in the War of the Spark novel that this love interest was basically killed off forever, but it seems like they're trying to restore it in some way because Nissa leaves that rejection feeling lost, scared, and lonely. Thus, this Golgari Nissa will be seen in Zendikar Rising. Expect more development in the shipping of Nissa and Chandra coming soon. If you stuck through the video for this long, and believe me, I didn't think I would be rambling on this much about these characters, then here's your reward as promised at the start of the video. The lesser known 4th main character of Zendikar Rising storyline, Zendikar itself. Yes, I know it feels cheap, but let me explain. One of the great selling points about the plane of Zendikar is its chaotic mana and a landscape that seems to have a life of its own. In truth, Zendikar's World Soul is one of the most powerful sources of mana throughout the multiverse. This is why we see great tectonic activity such as the Royals, the land literally rising up and creating elementals in order to defend itself. This was chiefly seen in its defense against the Eldrazi. However, now we'll see this powerful land in a state of calm, without a threatening force to combat, essentially for the first time ever in MTG's story. This sense of calm is represented by the highest elemental form on Zendikar, and the most present legendary throughout all of Zendikar's sets, Omnath. We've seen this powerful force go through so many changes over the years, adding in new mana sources to fit its current mood. It's like a living mood ring, with one of the most prominent being the Locust of Rage adding in red mana to fit its rage against the Eldrazi. Well, from packaging, it appears that old Omnath here is getting some white mana mixed in as well, maybe finally representing that the world of Zendikar is at peace. And that's probably the driving storyline, as lackluster as it could be, taking place in Zendikar Rising. A world so torn, finally at rest, being explored for the first time in MTG's history. And there you guys have it, a quick look at the 3 or 4 major players in the upcoming story for Zendikar Rising, their history with the plane, and their current storylines regarding Zendikar. Let me know your thoughts about these Planeswalkers and their roles in Zendikar Rising in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you support the channel by leaving it a like and of course subscribing so you never miss out on a new release. As always guys, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, see ya!